The moment my husband looked at the judge and said, "Your Honor, my wife has a history of fabricating things when she wants attention," I felt the air leave my lungs. Not because I was humiliated. Not even because half the courtroom turned to look at me. Because I knew exactly what was coming next. And so did he. I just didn't know that I wouldn't be the one who had to say it. My name is Patricia. I am 51 years old. I spent 22 years as a licensed occupational therapist, raised 2 kids, kept a house, kept a marriage, and kept my mouth shut more times than I can count. I am not a dramatic woman. I don't like scenes. I don't like confrontation. I was raised in a household where you handled things quietly, behind closed doors, the way decent people do. That quality, that quietness, nearly destroyed me. I met my husband Owen when we were both in our late 20s. He was a structural engineer. Tall, steady, the kind of man who measured things twice. I liked that about him. I thought it meant he was careful, thoughtful, that when he made a decision, he'd considered every angle. What I didn't understand then is that careful and cold can look exactly the same from the outside. We got married in October. My sister did the flowers. His mother, Gloria, sat in the front row and cried, and I remember thinking how sweet that was, a mother so moved by her son's happiness. I thought she and I would be close. I thought a lot of things. Owen and I settled in Raleigh, North Carolina, not far from where he'd grown up. I'd followed him there from Cincinnati, left my first job, my friends, the apartment I'd loved. That was fine. That was what you did. We bought a house in a neighborhood with old oak trees and good schools, and for a while it was exactly the life I'd imagined. The first time something felt wrong, I couldn't name it. It was around year 4. Owen had started getting closer to his mother again, phone calls every night. Dinners at her house every Sunday, little comments here and there about how I loaded the dishwasher, or how I'd spoken to one of the kids, nothing dramatic, just a slow, consistent erosion. Gloria was the kind of woman who never raised her voice. She was perfectly pleasant, perfectly polished, and perfectly committed to the idea that her son had made a mistake marrying me. She never said it out loud. She didn't have to. It was in the way she rearranged my kitchen when she visited. The way she asked Owen questions about our finances directly, as if I wasn't sitting right there. The way she called him sweetheart in front of my children while barely using my name. I told Owen it bothered me. He said I was being sensitive. I said I wasn't. He said, "Patricia, she's just trying to help." That was the conversation we had, more or less, for the next 15 years. My health started changing when I was 46, slowly at first. The kind of changes you explain away. I was tired all the time, but I worked long hours. My hands ached in the mornings, but I was on my feet all day at work. Some days the fatigue hit me so hard I'd sit in my car in the parking lot at lunch and just close my eyes for 20 minutes, because I couldn't imagine walking back inside. I went to my primary care doctor. She ran some blood work, said everything looked normal, suggested I try reducing stress. I tried to reduce stress. The fatigue got worse. Over the next 2 years I saw 4 different doctors. One suggested I might be depressed. One told me my vitamin D was low. One prescribed a medication that made me feel like I was moving through wet cement. The last one, a woman I'd chosen specifically because a colleague had recommended her, looked at me across her desk and said, gently but clearly, that she thought my symptoms might have a psychological component. I drove home in silence. I sat in the driveway for a long time. When I went inside, Owen was on the phone with his mother. He held up one finger, wait, and kept talking. I went upstairs, sat on the edge of the bed, and cried in a way I hadn't cried in years. Not because I was sad. Because I was exhausted and scared, and I had just been told, again, that what I was experiencing wasn't real. When Owen finally came upstairs, I told him what the doctor had said. He nodded slowly. "Maybe she has a point," he said. Something in me went very still. "I've been watching you, Patricia. You focus on it a lot. Maybe if you pushed through more." "Pushed through," I repeated. "I'm not saying it's not real. I'm saying maybe the way you're responding to it is making it worse." I didn't argue. I didn't throw anything. I lay down, turned toward the wall, and thought about what it means to be married to someone who has decided, somewhere along the way, that your suffering is a personality flaw. It was my colleague Janet who finally changed everything. We'd worked together for 11 years. She was an occupational therapist too, older than me by about 8 years, the kind of woman who remembered every patient she'd ever treated and followed up with half of them years later. We were having lunch in the break room when I mentioned, offhandedly, that I'd been having more trouble with grip strength. She set down her fork. "What kind of trouble?" I described it. I described the fatigue, the aching, the morning stiffness that took over an hour to ease. I described the way my knees had started giving out on stairs some days. Janet looked at me for a long moment. Then she said, "Patricia, how long have you been dealing with this?" "About 5 years. Has anyone tested you for an autoimmune condition?" The word hung there. "They said the blood work was normal. Standard blood work often doesn't catch it," she said. "You need a rheumatologist. A specific one. I'm going to give you a name." The rheumatologist Janet referred me to was a man named Dr. Harmon. He was thorough in a way I hadn't experienced before. He ordered a full panel of tests I'd never had, asked questions about my family history, asked about my symptoms in a sequence that felt like he was assembling a picture rather than just checking boxes. 6 weeks later, he called me into his office. I had psoriatic arthritis, had likely had it for years. The inflammation had been present for long enough that there was some joint damage already visible on imaging. It was manageable, it was treatable, but it was also absolutely, unambiguously real. I sat in his office and felt two things at once: relief so profound it was almost grief, and a rage so clean and quiet it scared me. I drove home and told Owen. He said, "Oh, that was it, just oh." He nodded, picked up his phone and went to check something in his email. I watched him do that. I watched him not ask a single question. I watched him absorb the information that his wife had been suffering from an undiagnosed chronic illness for 5 years, while he and his mother implied it was all in her head, and respond with the emotional investment of a man checking the weather. That was the moment I understood the marriage was over. I just didn't know yet how bad the ending would be. Owen filed for divorce 8 months later. I wasn't surprised. What surprised me was the paperwork. His attorney had put together a picture of our finances that I barely recognized. Accounts I hadn't known existed. Transfers going back 4 years. A business investment Owen had made with a portion of our joint savings, money I had earned just as much as he had, without telling me, documented as a personal loan that he was now claiming predated our marriage. I called my attorney, a woman named Carol, the morning I received the filing. She was calm in the way that good attorneys are calm, not because she wasn't concerned but because panic is never useful. "How much did you know about his finances?" she asked. "I thought I knew all of it," I said. "We had joint accounts. I paid the household bills. I never had any reason to think." "Okay," she said. "We're going to need a forensic accountant." Over the following months, what the accountant uncovered was methodical and deliberate. Owen had been moving money into a separate account for years. The business investment was real, but the documentation had been altered to make it appear older than it was. There were 2 accounts in his name alone that I had never been made aware of. When I told my sister Patricia, when I told my older sister Donna, she said something that I've thought about many times since. "He was planning this," she said. "This isn't something a person does in a few months. He's been building an exit for years." I thought about all the times I'd been sick and alone in my own house. All the times he'd been on the phone with his mother, while I sat somewhere trying to figure out what was wrong with my body. I thought about the way he'd said, "Maybe she has a point." I wondered how long he'd been preparing to leave while I was busy trying to survive. The hearing was a Tuesday in March. Raleigh had the kind of late winter cold that doesn't commit. Gray skies, a wind that cut through your coat without really being cold enough to justify the drama of it. I'd been awake since 4 in the morning. My joints were bad that day. Stress made everything worse, Dr. Harmon had told me, and I'd taken my medication and sat in the kitchen with a heating pad on my hands until the stiffness eased enough for me to get dressed. Carol met me outside the courthouse. She looked at my hands. She didn't say anything, just nodded. Owen was already inside. He was sitting next to his attorney at the respondent's table, and next to him in the front row of the gallery was his mother Gloria. She was wearing a beige blazer and pearl earrings, and she looked perfectly composed, the way she always did, and when I walked in she looked directly at me with an expression that I can only describe as satisfied. I sat down. I kept my eyes forward. The first part of the hearing was procedural. Documents submitted, timelines established. Carol had prepared thoroughly. The forensic accountant had prepared a report that laid out the financial discrepancies in clear, numbered detail. And then Owen's attorney did something I had not fully anticipated. He argued that the financial transfers were legitimate, that Owen had made good faith business decisions, that the documentation was accurate, that any confusion on my part was due to my limited involvement in our household finances. he said, with the smooth confidence of a man who practices this for a living, that my claims about Owen's financial conduct were consistent with a pattern. A pattern, Carol said. Mrs. Carmichael has a documented history, Owen's attorney said, of misinterpreting situations, of seeing intent where none exists. Her own medical records indicate that multiple physicians have noted psychological components to her presenting complaints. I heard Owen say something quietly to his attorney. I heard his attorney nod. Then Owen looked at the judge. Your Honor, he said, and his voice was so steady. My wife has a history of fabricating things when she wants attention. The room didn't gasp. That's not what happens in real courtrooms. What happened was quieter than that. The judge made a note. A few people shifted. Carol put her hand briefly on my arm. And I felt the air leave my lungs. Not because I was humiliated, I've said that. What I felt was something colder than humiliation. A kind of recognition. He had been building toward this for years. Not just the money, the narrative. The story where I was unstable, where my illness was performance, where everything I said could be dismissed. He had been patient about it. I had to give him that. I opened my mouth to respond, because the judge was looking at me now, and I needed to say something, and I was trying to find the words through the noise in my head, and then my left knee gave out. Not dramatically. I didn't fall. I had been standing to respond and my knee simply buckled, the way it did sometimes, the way it had been doing for years before I had a name for why. I caught the edge of the table. I didn't go down, but everyone in that room saw it. There was a moment of complete silence. And then, from the second row of the gallery, a woman stood up. I knew her face before I could place the name. Janet. Not my colleague Janet. This was a different woman, someone I'd met only twice. But someone whose name I had written in a notebook 2 years ago when Dr. Harmon had mentioned her as a resource. Her name was Janet Briscoe. She was a rheumatologist who consulted with Dr. Harmon's practice, and she had been in the courthouse that morning for a completely separate matter. A case in the next courtroom involving a disability determination. She stood up and she said, clearly and without drama, Your Honor, I'm a physician. This woman needs to sit down. The judge looked at her. I apologize for interrupting, Dr. Briscoe said. But I have direct knowledge of this patient's medical history, and I cannot in good conscience remain silent. What you just witnessed is a symptom of a diagnosed, documented autoimmune condition. It is not performance. It is not fabrication. And the characterization her husband's counsel just made is directly contradicted by years of medical evidence. The room was very, very quiet. Owen's attorney started to say something. The judge held up one hand. Are you willing to provide documentation? The judge asked Dr. Briscoe. I have records with me, she said. They were prepared for a different matter but are entirely applicable here. I can also provide a formal statement within 48 hours. The judge looked at Owen. Owen said nothing. Gloria in the front row had stopped looking satisfied. Carol requested a recess. The judge granted it. In the hallway, I sat on a bench and Dr. Briscoe crouched down in front of me, the way medical people do, getting to eye level, and checked my knee and asked me how I was feeling. I'm okay, I said. I'm not okay, but I'm okay. She almost smiled. That's a very sensible answer. I didn't know you would be here, I said. I didn't know you would be here either, she said. I was across the hall. I heard your name called when I was coming out of the restroom. I thought about that. The smallness of it. The randomness. I had spent 2 years being told my body was lying, and the person who could prove otherwise had been 20 feet away because of a scheduling coincidence. Thank you, I said. She squeezed my hand carefully, the way you do when you know someone's hands hurt. Tell your attorney to subpoena the full rheumatology file, everything from the first visit, the imaging, the inflammation markers, all of it. Don't let them narrow the scope. Then she went back to her hearing. What happened after that was not a movie ending. It wasn't fast, and it wasn't clean, and there were several more weeks of filings and counterfiling, and a deposition that lasted 4 hours and left me so exhausted, I slept for most of the following day. But the financial picture changed, with Dr. Briscoe's documentation entered into the record, and with the judge's evident skepticism toward Owen's attorney's characterization of me. The framing that Owen had been building for years started to fall apart. The forensic accountant's report carried more weight. The altered documentation on the business investment was examined more carefully. Owen's attorney pushed back, but with less confidence than he'd had on Tuesday morning. In the end, the settlement reflected what the marriage had actually been. The hidden accounts were considered marital assets. The business investment was partially offset against the marital estate. I kept the house by choice. Carole had advised me I could force a sale, but I wanted my children to be able to come home to something familiar. Owen did not go to jail. I want to be honest about that, because I know that's what some people expect from a story like this. Some final, dramatic punishment. The financial conduct was ruled deceptive, but his attorney argued successfully that there was no criminal intent, only civil liability. He paid a penalty. He was ordered to make me whole on the hidden transfers. There was no courtroom moment where he was led away in handcuffs. What there was this. His mother Gloria had to sit there and watch the judge read into the record that her son had systematically misrepresented the couple's finances and had made characterizations about his wife's mental health that were directly contradicted by documented medical evidence. She sat in that front row in her beige blazer and her pearl earrings, and she had to listen to that out loud. I'm not proud that this gave me satisfaction, but I'm not going to pretend it didn't. It's been 14 months since the settlement was finalized. I'm still in the house. My kids, my son Gregory, who is 23, and my daughter Melissa, who is 20, have been more than I deserved in these past 2 years. Gregory drove 4 hours from Charlotte the week after the hearing just to come sit with me. Melissa called me every Sunday morning for 6 months without fail, even during her finals. I never asked them to. They just did. My health is the best it's been in years. The medication Dr. Harmon has me on is working, and I understand now what I'm managing. On bad days I still have bad days. But I know what they are now. I know they're not weakness. I know they're not performance. I know what's happening in my body, and I know it has a name, and I know I'm not imagining it. That sounds like a small thing to know. It isn't. Janet, my colleague, the woman who sent me to Dr. Harmon, retired last spring. At her retirement party I told her what had happened. I told her about the hearing, about Dr. Briscoe being there by coincidence, about the way everything had turned on that moment. She looked at me for a second. Then she said, "It wasn't coincidence." I said, "What do you mean?" "I mean that you had been building that case for 2 years," she said. "The appointments, the documentation, the forensic accountant. You built the case, Doctor. Briscoe just happened to be the one who could say it out loud in the right room at the right moment. But you gave her something to say." I've thought about that a lot. There's a version of my story where I'm the woman who was saved by a lucky coincidence. Where a doctor happened to be in a hallway and happened to know my name and happened to say the right thing. I don't think that's the right version. I think I spent 2 years in pain, alone, being told by doctors and by my husband and by his mother that what I was experiencing wasn't real. I think I kept going anyway. I think I found one colleague who took me seriously, and I followed that thread until I had an answer, and then I documented that answer, and then I found an attorney who knew how to use it. I was quiet for a long time, quieter than I should have been. But the work I did in that quiet, the appointments, the questions I kept asking even when I was turned away, the records I kept, that work was still real. No one walked into that courtroom and saved me. I had already saved myself. I just needed someone to say it out loud. If you're somewhere in the middle of something like this, if someone in your life keeps telling you that what you're feeling isn't real, that you're too sensitive, that you're making it worse by focusing on it, I want you to hear this. Keep the records. Every appointment, every dismissed concern, every date, every doctor's name, every test result that came back normal when something was clearly wrong. Keep them somewhere your husband doesn't know about. Keep them somewhere his mother can't find. Not because you'll necessarily need them the way I did, but because the act of keeping them is itself a refusal to be erased. It's a way of saying, I know what I experienced. It happened. It's here in writing. You don't get to tell me it didn't. Owen called me once, about 3 months after the settlement. He said he wanted to apologize. He said he'd been doing some thinking. His voice had a quality I recognized. The voice of a man who has had some therapy and is now interested in being forgiven. I listened. Then I said, "Thank you for calling, Owen," and I hung up. My sister Donna called me that evening and asked how I was doing. "Fine," I said. And for the first time in a long time, I meant it.